Kia ora and welcome to the RNZ and Pacific Media Network discussion on the Cannabis Legislation and Control Bill, which, if passed, would introduce the bill into Parliament. Ko Māni Dunlop aho. The question voters will be answering this month is, do you support the proposed Cannabis Legislation and Control Bill? So what exactly does this bill allow? Here's Ben Strang.
In this year's election, voters can decide if they would like recreational cannabis to be legalised. The Cannabis Legislation and Control Bill provides the basis for this referendum, offering people an idea of how legalisation might work in this country. However, unlike with the End of Life Choice Act, this bill is not set in stone. If voters back decriminalisation, it will still have to pass through the Select Committee and a public process before passing into law. As things stand, recreational use of cannabis is illegal, but relatively common. According to studies, 1 in 7 people have used cannabis in the past 12 months, and up to 80% of people try marijuana before they turn 21. The weed that they're consuming is most commonly sourced through gangs, which thrive on the illegal black market for drugs. Medicinal cannabis is legal, with several medications available through GPs. That wouldn't change if recreational use was legalised. So, what impact is the illegality of cannabis having on our communities? More than 3,000 people were charged with drug offences involving cannabis in the last year, which is a massive decline from a decade earlier when more than 8,000 people were charged. Maori bear the brunt of the current laws. Last year, 45% of people charged with weed offences were Māori, even though Māori make up just 16.5% of the population. Even when comparing like-for-like offences, Māori are 3 times more likely to be arrested and convicted for a cannabis-related crime. And while cannabis possession has essentially been decriminalised, there were still 5 people imprisoned last year solely for possession or use of cannabis. Ministry of Health data shows 6% of users saying cannabis had a harmful effect on their work or studies, and 8% said it had a harmful effect on their mental health. The question is, would that change if recreational cannabis was legalised, and how? The purpose of the bill that's been put forward is to reduce cannabis-related harm to people and communities. The bill would do that by offering up legal marijuana that meets quality and potency requirements, attempts to eliminate the black market for weed, and raises awareness of the health risks of drug use. It would restrict young people's access to cannabis, limit the advertising and publicity of legal weed, and much like cigarettes, health warnings would be clearly visible at the time of purchase. Crucially, there would be improved access for people seeking health and social services to combat the health issues that are linked to cannabis use. And finally, the bill is supposed to ensure that people don't get unfair sentences for cannabis use, such as imprisonment for possession or supply. When it comes to the unequal treatment of Māori, the bill might shrink the gap, but the government's expert panel says it won't eliminate the racial bias in arrests and prosecution rates. As for the product itself, the bill sets out clear limits and rules for its use. Firstly, you have to be 20 years of age or older to use cannabis or to enter a shop or premises which sells it or allows consumption. Each day you'd be able to buy up to 14 grams of dried cannabis or the equivalent of that from one of those licensed outlets. Consuming cannabis in public would be banned. You could only use it on a private property or at a licensed premises. If you're a keen gardener, you'd be allowed to grow up to 2 plants on your own, up to a maximum of 4 plants per household. And you'd also be able to share cannabis with others, again up to 14 grams of dried marijuana or the equivalent of that. The last thing to note before voting is, if the majority say yes to recreational weed, it wouldn't automatically become law. This referendum only gives the elected government the option to introduce the bill, which would then still have to go through the full legal process. That's readings in the House, select committees, public consultation, and so on. Only then could recreational cannabis become legal. Now, how would all this work in practice, and would legalisation have the impact that lawmakers are hoping for? will it achieve the goal of reducing cannabis-related harm to people and communities?
No mai ora ki mai. And to discuss this further, I'm joined by an impressive tira of panellists to tease those issues out in Ben's piece. And we're joined by Ana Ika, social policy advocate and analyst at the Salvation Army in Manukau. Kia ora, Ana. Welcome. Also, we have from Hapai Te Hauora, Māori Public Health Advisor, Jessikha Leathem-Vlasic. Also, uri no te tai rāwhiti, Ngāti Porou. We also have Reverend Dr Hirini Kaa, kaiārahi at the University of Auckland. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā.
And writer, teacher and māmā and Hard Westie, as she describes herself, Emmaline Pickering-Martin. Kia ora kia koe.
Kia ora.
But Ana, I want to come to you first. Where do you sit on this issue?
I will be voting no.
And why is that?
I'm born and raised in Mangere, proud South Aucklander, work here, serve here. And when we're looking at this legislation and where these cannabis outlets are going to go, they're going to go where all the pokie machines went and where all the alcohol stores went, and they ended up in South Auckland or in places of low socioeconomic areas. I also work for the Salvation Army. We're an NGO that runs one of the biggest addiction services in the country. So we see firsthand the impacts of addictions in our community with alcohol and gambling. And if our government can't control alcohol and gambling, what makes them think they're going to be able to control cannabis?
Kia ora. Jessikha, where are you at with this issue?
Well, kia mātou o Hapai Te Hauora. So we're at Hapai, we are Māori public health leaders. Well, that's what we should be. And so in terms of this control bill, the most important thing for us is that as kaimahi, we might all have our own whakaaro on where we sit on the matter, but for us, the most important thing is ensuring that our whānau have all the information available to make the decision that works best for their whānau, for themselves. And that's not our job to determine that. Our job is to ensure they can understand what it would mean either way and make their decision from there.
Kapai. Kai a koe, Hirini?
Tēnā koe. I'm voting no. I admire the aspirations in the proposed legislation. I think the health approach, I think trying to address the institutionalised racism in our justice system, are admirable. I just don't think it's going to work. And the cost of it not working is the increase of a dangerous product in our community and in our whānau. So on balance, I'm going to vote no.
Kia koe, Emmaline?
Well, I will be voting yes. I think my reasoning comes from being a mum to a teenage boy who is Māori and Pacific, and seeing how that has affected our whānau, our extended whānau, and the health effects and all that sort of good stuff. But also just because I work in a mental health space, and I get to be a teacher and see lots of different perspectives, but personally my vote will be yes.
Kapai. So if you taki raised in that, and especially around it being a health and not a criminal issue, it's been a big part of the discussion is around treating it as such. Is that the right approach, Jessikha? I'm going to throw that to you.
I think that would force us to re-look at some of the assumptions that are made about cannabis use, particularly. It would make us take a step back and look at the harms that all substances cause in our communities, and not that we would scale them, but that we would have a better understanding of how they are used and applied, because it would possibly remove some of that stigma. So we would better understand cannabis. It would ensure that services that can support whānau that maybe identify problematic use of cannabis, they won't have that fear to seek support. It would mean we'd actually have a better understanding of what is actually happening out there, because it would mean that people are more likely to be open about that. I think that's probably a good starting place.
And Hirini, your thoughts on that?
I agree. I think the change to a health approach, again, is admirable, necessary, and a no-brainer in some ways. but our health system doesn't work for Māori. Our health system is broken. So the solution, the mitigation for this dangerous product in our midst won't work. The Labour government's just slow walking Y2575, no Māori health authority, no Māori control over our own health system. And we saw during COVID the lack of Māori voice. You know, this ain't just a theoretical objection. I think this is predicated on that health solution working. And if it won't work, we're going to get all the downsides and none of the upsides.
So what I'm hearing is address the health inequities and then we are able to introduce these bills. But how can we address such a huge systemic problem that we've been facing for so many years?
Y2575, the Labour government's got it on the table right in front of it, including the solutions like a Māori health authority. You know, it's right
The one
there.
that's not proposed, right? The current one, the diluted version that's proposed.
Well, yeah, because they went and did a review. And, you know, if they get a significant mandate in the next election, they've got no more excuses. They just better address these systemic issues. Otherwise, we're just, doing the sticking plaster thing, dealing with the symptoms rather than the actual core issues here.
Emmaline, you're nodding away to some of what Rev's saying when he's a clear no and you're a clear yes.
So the bill, like what we have at the moment, the legislation, the bill that's going to go in for referendum, isn't the final piece of legislation that's going to be introduced. So I'm nodding away yes, because there's opportunity here for the government or whoever is in charge to look at it and actually learn from other places like Canada, where they didn't speak to Indigenous people as much as they could have when they were introducing their legalisation bills, and so they've seen an effect on Indigenous people in Canada. So this is our chance to learn from things that have happened overseas in similar kind of areas. So I'm nodding because, there's like a chance that we can go in there now and we can consult with Māori and we can have those big discussions where Māori are like, well, actually, we want to make sure that we're covered here and that we have a stake in selling it legally, and that, we can profit from this and profit from that and that sort of thing. And it can all of the ideas that Māori have for Māori can come to the table and be proposed with moving forward. So I'm nodding because, I'm voting yes so that all these things can happen.
Anna, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, if you look at like our crime stats right now, cannabis is already heading that way towards a more health approach than it is a criminal approach. I mean, in the last decade, there's been a 63% decrease in convictions for cannabis, and so that indicates that we're moving away from treating cannabis as a crime and having a health approach. And when you're looking at the Misuse of Drugs Act, the police, they actually have a discretion to be able to give people that are caught with cannabis a warning before convictions. And so if you look at our numbers, it actually shows that we are moving towards a health approach to cannabis.
In terms of the application of that discretion that police have been given, Jessikha, I'm sure you kind of know a bit in that area of whether or not that is being applied appropriately by our police force.
Yeah, I think everyone would have seen just in the graphics earlier, I think it was up to, was it 45% of those convicted with cannabis offences were Māori? And I think you kind of see different versions of it, but some say 2 times, but most commonly you see it's 3 times. Māori are 3 times more likely to be charged for a cannabis-related offence. And then our males are like that much more vulnerable. I think we can all agree that something needs to change. Whether our communities and our hapori think that this bill is the best way forward, whether it's a good start and we make some really strong changes post-referendum, or if it's not, then we need to take a very hard collective, collaborative look at what we can do better moving forward, because the incarceration rates for Māori across the board, it's just inhumane, and the amount of resource that goes into keeping them in there is seriously disturbing. That we don't, and that's a bigger conversation, and I might be kind of digressing, but I think we can all agree on that something needs to change.
And you're not digressing at all, but that's a key point here, and I want to go to you, Hirini, around this, is that why not get this through and use it as a starting point? Because the status quo is clearly not working. That's what I'm hearing.
Because another risk is, one, that the mitigation won't work. The other is that it's a distraction. The Greens put this up. This is New Zealand in our kind of global cultural cringe, right? We've got to join the collective progressive club of nations, and this is one of the check boxes. So why didn't they put forward justice reform as a whole? Why didn't they put forward health reform as a whole? Why just this issue? Because this issue won't address the others. This is not a war on drugs.
You don't think it can?
This isn't a war on drugs. This is a war on Māori. I mean, consider the logic of those stats. Pākehā are not getting arrested for using cannabis. Māori are. Is that about cannabis, or is this about race? And if we say it's too big to fix, well, how's the legislation going to be racism proof? How's the application of it not going to be influenced by the racism in our society?
What's the alternative, though, other than, I know you've brought up Y2572 and the Māori Health Review?
Oh, yeah, I'm stupidly naive, that New Zealand can change. I think there are some signs of it changing. I think there's a younger generation who are different, who understand, this and accept this, the R word is a thing. For example, young Pākehā actually grappling with it rather than the previous generations. I think we shouldn't give up hope of change. I think, for example, the Kim Workmans of the world have some pretty solid suggestions about justice reform. I think there are other options here, and I worry again that this will be the sticking plaster. That's going to look. Oh, we've dealt with that. Interesting the way certain very high-profile politicians aren't engaging with this issue.
Like
but I'm not going to mention any names, but she's a very good PM. But I worry that afterwards she's going to jump on this bandwagon as well and just ride it to the no further action. So I'm not sure I was going with that analogy, but you know what I meant.
You had to get it in there.
Yeah.
Anna, can we trust our local government to decide where they put the dispensaries and how many we have?
Or have they done well with our pokie machines? Like, they haven't. And so we're pretty much putting the ball back into their court to trust them that they would put like these cannabis dispensaries, like not in my neighbourhood. I'm from Mangere. I mean, like the Brewer report actually did looked at where all of these dispensaries would go in an estimate for the Ministry of Justice. And they said that 119 retailers would come to Auckland. So I'm just like wondering, like, where would those retailers go? Because they're not going to go to Kohimarama or Remuera. Like, you'll see them where you see the liquor stores, where you see the pokie machines. And that's just for the big centres. When you break it down for retailer per population, if you're looking at somewhere like Gisborne, there's one retailer for every 4,000 adult. And then if you're looking at places like Whakatane, which have large Māori populations, there's one retailer for every 5,000 adult. Like, that's quite concerning, given that in the Brewer report, only 14% of the nation will benefit from this legislation when it comes to like using cannabis. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, I wouldn't trust I don't trust the government with that liquor stores, and I didn't trust the government with the pokie machines. Like, why would we give them the cannabis industry as well? I mean, if we're looking at pokie machines, in the last financial year, if you're looking at the amount of revenue that came in, just in Auckland alone, like, if 5 of the 6 top venues were in Mangere, in my neighbourhood, 5 of the 6 top venues that put the most revenue in the last financial year were in Mangere. Mangere has a deprivation level of 10, and from those 5 venues, they brought in $11 million. Like, that's ridiculous.
Jessica, that is quite a concerning issue. How can we avoid that from happening?
Well, I can definitely agree with alcohol density, gambling density. It's deeply concerning that continues to exist. And until those laws change, there's so much about that's not going to change. But I think, you could kind of argue as well that 1 per 5,000 or 1 per 4,000 is probably nowhere near what the current ratio in the illegal market is. Obviously, I can't give you those numbers. That's just another kind of the other side of the coin, I guess. That could be a very controlled way of managing the the legal the market of cannabis in our communities. And I think this bill could be if our whānau wish to see it go through, it could be an opportunity to get something right now rather than something as destructive as the alcohol industry and tobacco and gambling.
Emmaline, is that a concern for you in your community if these start popping up everywhere?
Yeah, well, in terms of the liquor and pokies, we have the trusts out west, so it's like a managed situation where we don't, it's not free for all, kind of like everywhere else in Auckland. But in response to the idea around one for every 5,000 or the 119 dispensaries that would be in Auckland, I guess, that's a massive issue. But we also have to look at like the dispensaries that are currently in Auckland that aren't dispensaries but are people selling weed. And like Jessikha said, then you can buy weed pretty much anywhere, so at any time. So I think by doing this, by being able to control exactly where it's sold and exactly how much is sold and labelling it and knowing its potency levels and that sort of thing, we're kind of minimising harm to the people who do go and who want to take part in it and who want to use it.
Is that a concern for you, Hirini?
Yeah, I live in Māori as well, and I see the alcohol shops and their special place in the community. I think there's also a consideration that there'll still be the other forms of dispensaries. The untaxed sort, the selling to younger, there'll just be another market, and it won't be eradicated in any quick time frame. So, we could get the worst of both worlds potentially as well.
Emmaline, you referenced some stats in Canada, is that right, around increased use?
Yeah, so statistics in Canada are that now that they've legalised, 65% of their market comes from illegalised legal dispensaries and purchasing that way. So if we look at that, that's 65% more than before, and that's 65% more that are controlled and that where it's coming from, where the money's going as well. So it's not just getting given to people who are doing it on the black market.
Hirini, is this concerning though that we don't have any really Indigenous specific stats that we can refer to in other countries who have legalised?
Yeah, I think using general population data, you'll read about youth rates, but in Canada, it's a very small proportion of those youth are Indigenous, and they have a very different experience of life and of cannabis and of the law. So I don't accept those kind of general use of figures. And I think Indigenous communities are both over and under-researched. Over-researched in the wrong ways and under-researched in ways that work for us. So I think the jury's out, I think, either way at the moment. It's a concern.
As an advisor, Jessikha, I'm sure you love stats. How much has that weighed in on ensuring that our people and New Zealanders as a whole are informed, and how important are these sorts of statistics, especially around potential increased use in other countries?
I think it depends on whose stats you're looking at, and you'll see quite varied numbers depending on what data you're looking at. But I think we'll definitely see a slight increase. I can't obviously guarantee how much that will be, purely based on the fact that people will be more prone to report their usage, that it's not illegal anymore. But yeah, I think across the board it will increase our ability to get some really robust research if it does go ahead, because it will remove those barriers, so we'll get a better understanding across the different demographics and communities.
And just on that, in terms of money and how much money how much tax this could generate if it becomes legal, and how that money can be funneled through back into the community, back into the health system. Anna, how can that be a bad thing?
So, like Canada, that Emmaline referred to, so the Centennial study looked at so for every dollar that Canada makes to go into these programs to support like the public health concerns with cannabis, they actually create $4.50 of social harm, and that's in Canada. And I just $1 for $4.50 of social harm, I don't think that's a risk that we should take. And when you're looking at alcohol in New Zealand, for every $1 that goes back into the community to support these public health programs, $7.50 worth of social harm is done in our communities. And like that just doesn't make sense.
Jessikha, though?
I don't have the flash dollar numbers like you, Anna, but I would say that that's probably relative to the justice dollar harm that is done at the moment, or could be, and then the social harms that come from those justice harms and the intergenerational harms that creates. And we haven't really spoken about it, but I guess we probably all know someone in our whānau that have been affected by cannabis-related offences, and how long that you carry that for.
If this bill goes through, Hirini, we could avoid that.
Yep. And, there's a strong, on the face of it, case for that. But, one, the cops are looking for our young people, particularly our young men. This is just one of the excuses. I mean, very few go to prison for possession. There's other things that the cops are going to get them for. The young people, say, are still going to get, and it's happening, say, in Colorado, still hugely disproportionate in terms of arrest rates for African Americans as opposed to white. So it won't fix that, and the cops will be looking for other offences potentially as well. So it doesn't necessarily fix that problem. Sorry.
Emmeline's Emmeline's chomping at the bit. Go.
No, I was just thinking, the rates in the piece earlier that we saw, it was like 3,000 people in the last however long have been arrested on or have been charged with marijuana charges. But that's like 3,000 people we can save by saying yes to this. And in saying that, I know that's like a really simplistic way of putting it, but that's 3,000 lives and whānau lives that if we take this away, won't be affected. And then, so if we look at like money-wise, I think it's like $700 million annually on Māori in prison on drug offences, and that's not completely cannabis related. But if we're gonna, take away one portion of that, why not? Like Jessikha was saying, there's it's relative to the justice harm that's being done and the money that we're spending there anyway. So by voting yes and having a look at this control and legislating with cannabis, we're able to kind of make those decisions now and include Māori in those conversations, because we've never had this conversation before, and now is our chance to do that and do it really well.
That's a good point, Ana.
Well, because Emmaline talked about the stats said in that there's 3,000 charges, but only 15% of those charges actually make it to convictions. And when you're looking at in the past year, there's only been 13 people that have got home detention or been incarcerated because of cannabis possession and use. So 13 people, I know that's a huge deal for those individuals and their families, but I think it's such a risk with this legislation. I think if we were talking about decriminalisation, we'll be having a different conversation, but that's not the case. This legislation is all of the above, not just decriminalisation and something else. It's all of it.
You could also say that the rest of those numbers, their first offence probably was cannabis, and it's escalated from there. Their relationship with the justice system that was the beginning for them. And not all, we can't assume that was everyone, but often that is the case.
I think one of the sad things here is that, we all kind of agree on, and yet we're being forced into yes-no positions because of the referendum, and sadly, Māori aren't going to be included in the discussion. It's going to a parliamentary process. When do Māori get included in that process apart from, our MPs? So, while this conversation's rich and lots of, potential to it, it's where this goes as well.
Mm-hmm. We were involved in some of the consultation with Māori leading to the actual drafting of the bill, and I think they've actually done a really good job at capturing some very, very diverse whakaaro. We'd be in smaller Māori communities, and in this ropu of, say, 10, there were half, everyone had very different angles and so many different things to consider. And here were these three people sitting there trying to capture everything, and that was only but one of the many, many hui that they were a part of. But yeah, that's not where it should end, and we all agree that was just the beginning. And if it does go ahead, we definitely need to be at every stage moving forward. Yeah.
It's really expensive, really hard to access to get medicinal cannabis. So if this goes through and it is legalised, it will become so much more accessible to many who need it for a myriad of reasons, to keep them alive essentially and to keep them pain-free. I mean, is this something that you've thought about or that you think is important, Emmaline?
Yeah. Equity and access to cannabis for medicinal purposes is out the gate. Like, we know that it costs anywhere from, I think it's over $300 to $1,200 to access medicinal cannabis currently. And so when by saying yes and regulating and controlling the substance, we're able to have people who currently cannot access it at all, be it because they can't get to a GP, they can't get to another GP because they have multiple sign-offs, they can't, it makes so much more sense for people who actually can't get it. And it's the most marginalised, and it's Māori and Pacific people, chronic pain in general, cancer, anxiety, depression, all the people who suffer from these all use medicinal cannabis but can't access it because of current laws.
Yeah, I mean, they need it now, so we're going to be waiting a long time for that 2572 to come through.
Well, no, we don't have to wait because it's sitting right there for Labour just to pick it up and do it. I think this is a high-risk referendum and bill. The risks, yes and no, legal, health for our communities. I really worry about this secondary issue being brought in. I mean, Pharmac should just fund it properly. And again, the government's got plenty of money for employment subsidies for anything. They've got 20 billion sitting there. What's actually stopping them funding these pharmaceutical products? I worry about people voting for this, even though I completely agree what it can do, because it sidetracks from the main issues here.
Jessikha?
Yeah, no, I just thinking in terms of the constitutional stuff, like in the bill, I think the advisory committee must have Māori representation, and they advise the Cannabis Authority. But why don't we have mandatory Māori representation on the authority itself? Why are we always in advisory positions? And it's something we see far too often, which is a definite thing that we would want incorporated if it does go ahead. And same with the review. I think it's like a 5-year review period. That's probably too long. We need that sooner, so that we can adjust the regulations as we need, if it moves forward. We don't want things set, so set and locked in.
Cool. Ana, around medicinal having the impact on that
so
market.
The New Zealand Medical Association is opposed to the bill, and then you've got the New Zealand Respiratory Association that's also opposed to this bill. But as a former youth worker, I used to work for Canteen, which is a charity that supported young people with cancer. And I've seen firsthand our young people use cannabis because of chemo or radiation, because it's hard. But then, what's really hard is when they come into remission, praise the Lord. But then the only thing that they want after they come into remission is a bit of normalcy. But now they have this addiction issue and the mental health issues that come with it. This is just firsthand what I've seen. And they have to deal with that, and so they're trying to find, employment or find a bit of normalcy in their life, but they can't do that because they've got all this other issues that their cannabis use during their treatment attributed to that. I'm not saying that it's the cannabis definitely helped them cope through their treatment, but now they have to deal with the after effects of that, and I think that's quite sad. When you beat cancer, now here's something else to deal with.
Do you think that's an accurate statement, Emmaline? What do you think of that?
That's Anna's experience, and I would never speak to someone else's experience. That's completely valid, and I think if you have enough, if you have education in the right spaces and given by the right people, if you have control, if we know, for chronic. When they smoke for chronic pain, it's not like they're smoking an ounce a day for chronic pain. There's different levels to it and different ways in which people control their pain with cannabis. But yeah, it is that obviously is an issue that Ana's encountered, and yeah, completely valid. I just think that education in all those spaces while they're using cannabis is really, really key.
In shifting tack though as well, in terms of use, and we touched on the increased use before, and just to reiterate some of the what you'll be able to buy. So it's 14 grams a day you'll be able to buy. You'll be able to grow 2 plants as per adult and 4 max in a household. Are you worried about that? Are you worried, Emmaline? Are you worried about how much people will have access to?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's part of why I'm voting yes, so that that can be drawn down and looked at and talked about, discussed, and that's what we want people to do. We want people to be there and discuss it, because it will go back to public discussion, consultation. And so 14 grams is a lot of marijuana. It costs like something $1,200 a day if you're going to go there and buy that much. So yeah, and to have 4 plants in your home, that's a lot of marijuana. But again, that's why we want to progress this forward, so that that can be discussed. It could be lessened, it could be looked at again, lots of different options.
And Jessikha, you touched on though about how with the convictions and then leading into maybe more serious convictions, especially for Māori. Could this be viewed as well in terms of the drug being a bit of a gateway, being a bit of a slippery slope, and if it's more accessible, that people, they'll start to use it more?
I think we see it's already being used. I mean, I would imagine that.
But accessibility, though.
Perhaps, yes. And like Emmaline said, 14 grams, that's like half an ounce, I think. That's like a whole lot of marijuana, cannabis. And these are definite things that we can strengthen in the bill. But I think by having a minimum age of 20, we're at least agreeing on some point that, and that it should be, we should move that across to alcohol and tobacco as well. That shouldn't be, and I hope that's not where it stops.
Rev, do you think also though that it is a slippery slope? It is a legitimate concern for many.
I think the damage that cannabis can do is, gets underestimated, particularly in vulnerable whānau. And not just psychosis, it's got its own form of addiction. It's got a kind of a sociological addiction when you've got less options in your life, less hope, getting high is a way out of that. The other one is, look at alcohol, look at, all the promises made, and we lowered the age, we opened the access to it. New Zealand doesn't do well. If it's only harming brown people, we don't really care. We just go for broke. And look at alcohol. We might set off with great intentions, but where this goes is very worrying once the lobby gets in there.
The people who are really advocating for the yes vote and the demographic in which they're from, Hirini, you're smirking, so I'm going to come to you on that.
I thought I was smiling politely.
Is that a concern for you of who is pushing their agendas and the types of backgrounds that they come from?
Yeah, I think there are some really well-meaning, passionate people on both sides of the debate, but I think there is a crowd who think prohibition is some kind of ethical issue in itself. This issue is not really impacting Pākehā cannabis users. I think the emphasis needs to be the focus of this needs to be on the impact on the marginalised, on Māori and Pacific communities in particular. Don't vote because you want to go and have a joint, because you can go have a joint anyway. The police aren't going to chase you for it. Think about it from that perspective.
We're talking about the discussions and the conversations, and these are really important to have. Ana, what are the conversations being had in your whānau, in your communities on this particular issue?
As a Tongan and from a Pacifica descent, like our median age in our community is 23 years old, and so it's really important to acknowledge that for young people, their brains don't stop developing until they're 25, and there's scientific evidence to support the impacts that using cannabis does on a developmental brain, but also looking at my community and the young population that we have. This legislation doesn't do much in way of protecting those 19 and down, and if we go back to the police stats, the second age group that gets apprehended the most because of cannabis use and possession is 15 to 19-year-olds, and this legislation barely does anything for them. That means they're still going to be accessing that black market. And so that's really important when you're looking at a Pasifika community that is predominantly young, that is predominantly in low socioeconomic areas. We need to think about our future, because if we drop the ball with this referendum, they're going to cop the consequences for it.
Emmaline, what are the sorts of kōrero that you're having within your whānau and within your community on this?
Yeah, I think because I have children in that age range, the 15 to older, we've had lots of conversations around what drug education there is currently, what my kids are being taught in schools, what I've taught children in schools, because I've been a primary school teacher for years. And so there's currently no drug education. It's just basically cannabis is bad, don't do it, it's illegal. It'll there'll be you'll have brain issues, that sort of thing. But, that's one of the things that I find would be helpful in taking the taxes and pushing them into education around cannabis use. We could mitigate some of that usage if we were telling them early exactly what it is to use cannabis, exactly what it does, where cannabis comes from, all those sorts of things. Because currently we're just saying to them, don't use it, it's bad. And you know what teenagers are like. They're like, what, it's bad? Okay, I'm just going to go out and get some. It's not, it's for too long we've been weed's bad, don't do it. And many people in my whānau, in my community, have used marijuana, and it's just, it's always there. So why not now be more focused about it, control it, and really educate our babies so that they know, it is bad, but we can do we can let you know how it works and how your body responds to it and all those sorts of things. And, do it like we do with smoking, because we do it with smoking. We have cessation programs that work, and we can do that with cannabis too.
Hapai, I feel like we're talking about tobacco control. You're like, yeah.
No, I was just thinking, with high schools and stuff, the current approach is you get caught with weed, you get suspended. What do those kids do? They go home and smoke the weed. They're not going to, and so we were doing some mahi with Rangatahi around vaping, and so cannabis wasn't even on the radar, and we had, at the end of this workshop, getting their whakaaro on what they thought about the vaping regulations, and it was really interesting. And at the end, this group of girls or young women came up to me, and we're all hush and quiet, and I think they trusted us because we were there talking to them like they were valid, and they had valid whakaaro about what we were talking about, so they felt safe to come and ask me for help around their cannabis use. And I'm not trained in anything like that, and it was really sad to see that they acknowledged they're smoking a bit too much. This is what's going on in their whānau. Who can help me? I had nowhere to go. I didn't know, and I had to talk to some of the kaimahi we knew in the area to link them up with someone. But that very much they felt like bad. Well, but they were there. Acknowledging that they had, they knew that it wasn't good for them, how they were using it, their relationship with it. It really broke my heart to see that I couldn't actually do anything for them.
And I think this is something the bill can do, though. It can make it more visible. It can make those conversations easier and more accessible for our rangatahi especially, don't you think?
Yeah, kia ora. In theory it can. Yeah. I think, again, back full circle, and it'll be in the hands of our health system and our education system that doesn't work for our young people. Show me the program that's mitigated. I mean, look at tobacco. It's a mess. Young Māori women rates are the highest. We're taxing it like insane. I get kaumātua picking up butts all around me. We're messing that up too, it seems. And we've got some great people doing some great work. But the fix needs to be higher up than just this issue.
I feel like you have the same answer to every single question.
It would be like that, wouldn't it? Yeah.
And what are the conversations being had within your whānau, within your community?
That's why I got into this, not because of the high-level constitutional issues in this, but because of my whānau. Because I see intergenerational use of cannabis, dependence on cannabis, and the destruction it does in my whānau, in my community. That's why I'm passionate about this, as we all are. Because, it freaks me out. And the risks of this are extremely high. That's why I'm not singing Kumbaya and thinking this is the magical answer to everything. I'm coming to a different conclusion, but for the same reasons as everyone else.
We're coming towards the end of our kōrero, and I want just to end on what you want people to go in to that booth with. What's the one thing you want them to think about? Emmaline, I'll just start with you. What do you think? What do you want people to think about when they go into that booth?
Yeah, I think what I would like people to think about when they go into the booth is think about what is the status quo now and what ways can we do better to reduce harm to our babies, basically. So what are our children going through now? And irrespective of the larger issues at hand, equity in the justice system, equity in the healthcare system, what can we do now currently to change, even if it's just a little bit in some way, change the way things are going? So yeah, when you're going in there, just think like, what are we doing now? Can we make it even a little bit better? Which way am I going to vote?
Okay.
I think to the predominantly Pākehā middle class audience of Radio New Zealand, I think go into that booth, use the evidence, use your conscience, vote as you want, but own it. Own the result, yes or no, and put the pressure on Labour. They're going to have a spectacular mandate from the look. They can do these big changes that need to happen. Put the pressure on them. Don't think this is the end of anything.
Kia ora.
Yeah, I think I just want our whānau to, do your research, ask questions, talk to your whānau, vote for those who might not make it to the booth, vote with your heart, with your head, and I think if our whānau choose to vote yes, understand that there's still a lot of hard work and a lot of things that will need to go into making this work for our whānau. And if you vote no, be confident in why you're voting no, and think about, we've all acknowledged something needs to change. So let's have a think about what could we do differently or better moving forward if this is not it.
Okay. Kia ora. Ana.
I think for myself, I just like people to know that this has drastic impacts for our young people, and a lot of them don't get to vote. So just make sure that when you vote that you're informed and that you know that who this legislation, if it comes into play, regardless of what it looks like, who it's going to impact, because it's going to impact the lower socioeconomic, it's going to impact the marginalised and those that where disparities already exist already. So just know that the consequences of your vote, but yeah, like Jessikha said, own your vote, and be informed when you vote. Don't just follow and be a sheep.
O nei te mihi kia koutou katoa, tēnei pai kōrero. Thank you so much to our panelists today, talking the big issue of cannabis legalisation. And on our website, rnz.co.nz, we have plenty of content to inform yourself when you go into that booth on election day. Thank you for joining us. Tēnā rā koutou katoa, noho ora mai.